What would you do if the plane you were traveling on crashed in the middle of the Andes and the entire world believed you were already dead? On October 13th, 1972, a Uruguayan Air Force plane carrying 45 people took off from Montevideo, Uruguay, heading towards Santiago, Chile. Among the passengers were members of a Uruguayan rugby team, their friends and family members. They thought they were going on a normal trip, but they had no idea that within hours, their plane would crash into one of the most dangerous mountain ranges on Earth, the Andes. The crash would kill many people immediately. Those who survived were left thousands of meters above sea level, surrounded by snow, freezing temperatures, and mountains stretching in every direction. And then, something even worse happened. The rescue teams stopped looking for them. The outside world believed there were no survivors. But deep inside the mountains, there were still people alive. They would spend 72 days fighting hunger, freezing temperatures, avalanches, injuries, and the terrifying realization that nobody might ever come for them. Before we uncover exactly what happened during those 72 days, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because we tell the true stories of incredible survival, mystery, and history. Let's go back to October 13th, 1972, the day Flight 571 disappeared into the Andes. The aircraft was a Fairchild FH-227D. It left Montevideo carrying 45 people and headed west toward Chile. But standing between them and Santiago was one of the greatest natural obstacles in South America, the Andes Mountains. The Andes are enormous. Some peaks rise thousands of meters above sea level, and flying through them requires extremely accurate navigation. The weather was also difficult. Clouds and mountains made visibility dangerous. The aircraft had already been delayed and had spent a night in Mendoza, Argentina. The next day, the flight continued. The pilots believed they had reached a position where they could begin descending towards Santiago. But there was a serious problem. They were wrong about their location. They had not yet safely crossed the Andes. The mountains were still around them. As the aircraft descended, the passengers had no idea what was happening. Suddenly, the mountains appeared through the clouds. The pilots tried to climb, but there wasn't enough time. The aircraft struck the mountains. The impact tore the aircraft apart. Parts of the plane were ripped away. Many passengers died immediately. But incredibly, some people were still alive. The survivors were injured, terrified, and trapped in one of the most remote environments on Earth. They were surrounded by snow and mountains. There was no town nearby, no road, no hospital, and no easy way out. There were 45 people on the aircraft. The crash itself killed many. Those who survived immediately began helping the injured. They turned part of the aircraft wreckage into a shelter. The seats became beds. Pieces of the aircraft became useful equipment. Anything they could find was valuable. But there was one enormous problem. They had almost no food. The flight had been planned to last only a few hours. Nobody had packed enough food to survive for weeks in the mountains. At first, they believed rescuers would find them quickly. They were wrong. During the first few days, the survivors listened for aircraft. Whenever they heard an engine, they hoped rescue had finally arrived. They tried to make themselves visible, but from the air, the white wreckage blended into the snow. Search aircraft flew over the mountains, but they couldn't find the survivors. Then came the news that would destroy their hope. The search was eventually called off. The outside world believed there were no survivors. But inside the mountains, people were still alive. They had become completely dependent on themselves. Night, temperatures dropped dramatically. The survivors were not prepared for the extreme cold of the Andes. They had normal clothes. They had no proper winter shelter. They had no heating. They slept close together to conserve body heat. They melted snow for water. But every day became harder. The injuries were painful. The food was disappearing. And their hope was slowly fading. Then, another disaster struck. An avalanche swept into the wreckage. Snow buried the survivors inside the aircraft. Several more people died. Those who survived were now trapped under the snow. The disaster reduced their numbers even further, and they realized something terrifying. Waiting for rescue might mean waiting for death. They had to find another way. Eventually, almost all of their food disappeared. They searched through the wreckage. They found whatever small amounts of food remained. But there was nowhere to hunt. There were no supermarkets, no farms, no trees full of fruit. There was almost nothing edible around them. Only snow, rocks, and the bodies of those who had died. Eventually, the survivors made one of the most horrifying decisions of the entire ordeal. They began using the bodies of the dead as a source of food. For them, it was not a simple decision. It was a psychological and moral battle. But they believed they had two choices: do it or die. They chose to survive. The original group included both men and women. However, most of the passengers were young men from the rugby team. Several women were also on the aircraft. But after the crash, injuries, exposure, and the avalanche took more lives. By the time the final rescue took place, all 16 survivors were male. This is an important detail because many retellings simply say that 16 people survived, without explaining how the group changed over the 72 days. Eventually, only 16 people remained alive, but they still faced the biggest problem of all. They were trapped. They had no way of knowing exactly where they were. They couldn't simply walk downhill and expect to find a town. The Andes were enormous. So 2 survivors decided to attempt something almost impossible. Their names were Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa. They believed that if they stayed where they were, everyone might eventually die. So they prepared for an expedition. Parrado and Canessa gathered whatever supplies they could carry. Then they started walking. They climbed through snow and mountains. Every step was exhausting. The altitude made breathing difficult. The cold attacked their bodies. They were weak from hunger, but they kept moving. Day after day, they continued. They climbed one mountain after another. And every time they reached a higher point, they hoped to see civilization, but all they could see were more mountains. Still, they refused to give up. Eventually, after days of walking, they saw something they had almost stopped believing existed. A person. A Chilean muleteer named Sergio Catalan was in the area. Parrado and Canessa desperately tried to communicate with him. Catalan realized that these men needed help. He contacted authorities. Suddenly, the impossible became possible. The survivors had been found. It had been almost 2.5 months since the crash. The survivors had endured approximately 72 days in the Andes. Then, rescuers finally reached the remaining survivors. They were taken out of the mountains. 16 people survived. 45 had boarded the aircraft. Many had died in the crash. Others died from injuries, exposure, and the avalanche. But 16 made it home alive.
Think about that for a moment. On October 13, 1972, 45 people boarded a plane in Uruguay. They expected to arrive in Chile. Instead, the aircraft crashed into the Andes. For 72 days, the survivors fought hunger, freezing temperatures, injuries, avalanches, and despair. The world believed they were dead, but they were still fighting. And eventually, 2 men walked out of the mountains searching for help. They found it, and because of that journey, 16 people came home. The story of Flight 571 isn't simply about a plane crash. It's about what happens when people are pushed beyond what they believe they can survive. They lost friends. They lost family members. They faced extreme cold. They faced starvation. They faced an avalanche. And they were forced to make decisions that no human being should ever have to make. But they continued. 45 people entered the Andes. 16 came out alive. And they survived for 72 days in a place where survival seemed impossible. If you enjoyed this true story, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below. If you were one of those survivors, what would you have done to stay alive? Because sometimes the difference between life and death is not strength. It's refusing to give up.